James smiled when I questioned him about why he had created a family card for his in-laws, responding, "They should receive a family card since they are my family, right? Have an issue with that." He said, "If you knew who took you in when you were all alone, you wouldn't say such things, would you?" His audacious tone caught me off guard because I had never heard it before. Was James this way all the time? He went on, "I'll consider you a member of the family if you're grateful, and do more for my family. You act as though you're on trial till then." The concept of a trial period in marriage was new to me. In other words, you're not yet a complete member of the family, James continued. You can leave at any time if you don't like it. Right now, there are just the 6 of us in our family. I was surprised. I quickly moved out and canceled all of our joint credit cards after that. I'm Olivia Cook, and I'm 30 years old. I work as an independent illustrator. Prior to starting my own business 5 years ago after getting married, I worked as a designer for a large advertising firm. I work from home now. I was raised by my maternal grandparents after my parents passed away in an accident when I was a small child. For college, I returned to my parents' flat close to the city center, where I have been ever since. At the Italian restaurant where my husband James worked, I got to know him. My coworkers and I frequently visited because it was a pleasant establishment with affordable costs and delicious meals. That's when everyone started talking about James, the attractive waiter. He was handsome indeed. I could understand the managers joking that many of the regulars come especially to watch James. I will admit that I became a fan of James since I found him to be incredibly cool. For some reason, he stuck out. We grew closer very fast, and before long, we were referred to as a couple. We ended up getting married, which surprised me. I seemed to have been in a stupor at the time, and I don't recall much of it. I was married to a man I was referring to as my husband when I finally woke up. However, I was thrilled when James and I got married since I loved him then. I left the company where I worked as a designer and began working on my own. The parting was amicable, and I carried on with the same type of work, but independently. James continued to work various hours, even late into the night at the Italian restaurant. Since working normally became difficult, I made the decision to pursue my lifelong dream of working independently. Olivia, that's a smart concept. You'll find it easier, and it's wonderful to continue doing what you enjoy. James agreed with my choice. That was the start of our married life. We opted not to have a wedding ceremony and simply registered our marriage because neither of us liked ostentatious things. We only had a brief encounter with each other's families. James went to work, and I worked from home and did the household chores. Our schedules were irregular, but we kept in touch and waited to have meals together when we were both home. It was a happy, simple life, and I thought, marriage is nice. But about a year after we got married, everything fell apart. "My family wants to come over. Is that okay?" James asked one day. "Of course," I said. "It's fine." I had only met and briefly talked to James's family at our initial meeting, so I thought this was a good chance to get to know them better. Having lost my parents at a young age, I always admired James's large family, but when his family of 5 arrived, I was left speechless. "Hey, which room is mine?" his sister asked as soon as she walked into our house. James's sister, who is 35 years old and 3 years older than both James and me, worked at a local supermarket. I was shocked by her rude behavior, so different from the polite greeting she had given me when we first met. James's 22-year-old sister was also there, but she was quiet and just stood there without saying a word. I remember she barely spoke when we first met. Hurrying by James's sister, I showed the 2 sisters to the guest room and James's parents to the room that used to be my parents' room. It was the only Japanese-style room in the apartment, so I thought it would be best for them. After settling into their rooms, James's sister announced, "Well, since we're going to be living here together, you better start serving our family properly." I was confused by what she meant, But when I looked at James for help, he just laughed in a way I had never seen before. It turned out his family had given up their own home and moved into my apartment without telling me. "Sorry, our family home suddenly had to be vacated, and they had nowhere to go," he explained. "I wish he had told me earlier. I had thought it was just for a day or 3, and this was really inconvenient." When I mentioned this to James, trying not to upset him, he looked down and apologized. "Please, just until they find somewhere else to go," he pleaded. I couldn't say no. How could I turn away people in need, especially the family of someone important to me, without even a place to go? I reluctantly agreed to live together on the condition that they find a new place as soon as possible. But I would come to regret this decision. James's family showed no restraint. All 4 of them, from the day they moved in, did nothing and left everything to me, saying whatever they wanted. They made no effort to look for a house or a job. When I asked about their jobs, I was in for another surprise. "Oh, I quit that lousy supermarket job," his sister said. She had claimed she was employed, but apparently it was just part-time work. I had thought she worked full-time because of her age, but she told me she hadn't had a steady job since high school. James's parents also had part-time jobs, which they quit before coming here, and of course, James's other sister was unemployed. She had claimed she was a student, but that was not true. "Why should I work when I've become part of a wealthy family?" she asked. When I asked who she was talking about, I got another shocking reply. "You, of course. You got a big settlement and insurance money from your parents' accident, and you don't even have a mortgage on this apartment. You can live without working," James's sister said, laughing. I complained to James when he got home, but he yelled in a way I had never seen before. Everyone's tired from suddenly having to leave their home. Let them rest for a while, or do you want to kick out my family, Olivia? Stunned, I froze. Then James suddenly softened his tone. "Sorry for yelling. I'm having a tough day, too. Can you just be a little more patient?" Looking back, James was skilled at manipulating situations with a mix of kindness and harshness. But at that moment, I didn't see it and agreed to endure a bit longer. The tyranny of James's family got worse. They treated me like a servant at home and demanded money when going out. "We can't job hunt without a penny, can we?" they said. "It's fine, but if we can't find work, we'll just keep living here." I reluctantly gave them some money, which they claimed to have spent without finding jobs. They probably never looked for work, but if I said that, they would accuse me of lying without proof. James's whole family would blame me for hours. Telling James didn't solve the problem. Everyone's frustrated about not finding jobs. "Sorry, just bear with it a little longer," James said, trying to smooth things over. But as time went on, I felt like saying anything was pointless. However, the frequency of them asking for money gradually decreased, perhaps because James said something. So the issue seemed to resolve itself. Of course, the money I had given them was never returned. Then, after about 2 months of living this way, I noticed something alarming. Why is the credit card bill so high? Could it be unauthorized use? When I quickly checked the credit card statement, all the charges were made with family credit cards. The purchases included food, drinks, books, games, and even expensive brand bags and clothes. Each item was labeled with a number from 1 to 6, showing that 6 family credit cards had been issued. These credit cards were in my name, with James using the family cards. "It seems like you'd be better at handling this, and it's more convenient to consolidate payments, right? Can I leave it to you?" he had said, and I ended up managing them. But it turned out these family cards had been issued without me knowing. James's family stopped asking for money because they could now make credit card payments and cash withdrawals. When I confronted James about why he made family cards for his in-laws without asking me, he laughed and said, "Well, you complain when they say they have no money, so what choice do I have?" Besides, you know who took you in when you were all alone, right? Can you really say such things to the important family of your benefactor?" I was stunned into silence by his bold tone, unlike anything I had heard before. Was James always like this? "If you're grateful, you should serve my family more. Then I'll acknowledge you as family too. Until then, consider it like you're on a trial period," he continued. I had never heard of a trial period in marriage. Seeing my silence, James pressed further. "This means you're not yet an official family member. If you don't like it, you can leave any time. Right now it's just the 5 of us in our family. Useless parasites. Get out." That's when I realized James's true nature. I felt as if all the blood had drained from my body. Shocked, I considered divorcing James. In fact, I began to wonder why I had married him in the first place. Initially, I just thought he was a handsome guy. Like the other girls, I was just excited about him being handsome, without any particular reason. Then, one time when I went to the restroom, James approached me. "You seem different from other people, Olivia. I don't know, kind of mystical. Sorry, it's not something I should say to a customer." I was surprised but kept listening, and I gradually started to pay more attention to James. Maybe that was his plan, to make me like him. When I think about it calmly, it makes sense. I remember once when James came to our table for small talk, a colleague jokingly said I was a wealthy lady living alone in a condo. It was right after that he started talking to me, probably because he was interested in my wealth and the condo. Honestly, James wasn't really my type. To put it nicely, he was modern. To put it bluntly, he seemed a bit frivolous. I liked mature men who spoke quietly and seriously, but somehow I ended up falling for James. I always found that strange, since James was the typical handsome guy, and it must have been easy for him to charm a woman, especially someone like me, who was new to the workforce and not used to men. I fell for his tactics and ended up marrying him. This thought made me feel so frustrated and embarrassed. I felt like destroying everything in the house, but I wasn't foolish enough to act on that impulse. Instead, I decided to get revenge. To do that, I needed to endure this life a little longer. Just like James manipulated me, I planned to control his entire family. The condo we live in was bought by my father with a mortgage soon after I was born. It wasn't very expensive back then, but the area developed rapidly with a new shopping center nearby, and now it's considered a luxury condo. My parents, hoping for more children, bought a spacious condo. That's why there's enough room, even with James's family moving in. But even with its decent size, having James's family around is a nuisance for me, especially working from home. I'm enduring this only for the sake of revenge. As James's sister said, there's no mortgage payment for this condo. When I was 4, both of my parents died in a car accident. They were coming back from my paternal grandfather's funeral when they collided with a speeding car on the freeway. That day, I was supposed to go with my parents, but I caught the flu that was going around and had a high fever, so my maternal grandparents came to the condo where we lived with my parents to take care of me, leaving me as the only one who survived. The mortgage payments were covered by the group credit life insurance, so the only housing costs I pay are the management fees and property taxes. James, seeing the amount, said he would contribute just a bit more than that to our household expenses. There's no mortgage, so if I put in that much, we should manage with Olivia's income, right? We'll each use our own earnings for personal expenses. Sounds good, doesn't it? I agreed, thinking maybe he was right. Until then, I had been paying for everything by myself, so I thought his contribution would lighten my load. Looking back, it was foolish, but at the time I was blinded by my love for James and just went along with whatever he said. James probably thinks he's the head of the household and the one supporting me, which is why he can so easily call me a parasite. But in reality, it's different. I pay for most of the expenses, like utilities, food, social expenses, and entertainment. And now 5 real parasites have been added to my household, making it impossible to manage with just that amount. I wanted to get rid of them as soon as possible, but I pretended not to notice and endured. I gritted my teeth and let James's family freely shop, reminding myself that I'll be the one laughing in the end. Then, 5 months after deciding to divorce, the day to act finally came. "I'm tired. Please decide. It's either me or your family," I told James, presenting him with a final decision. He was surprised, but I continued without concern. "None of your family members lift a finger to help around the house. They just dump all their chores on me. You know I work from home. I'm not just playing around, yet they treat me like a freeloader and tell me to know my place. Since you're supporting me, I've had enough." I cried. I confronted James. He smirked at me and said, "Then you should leave. Didn't I tell you before you're not really part of this family yet? Giving up like this means you didn't earn your place in the family." I acted shocked as I looked at him. "What are you surprised about? If you can't live with my family, then you're the one who has to leave. Oh, and since I'm not at fault, I'll take this apartment as alimony, and I'll take half of your savings as part of the property division." Ah, so that was his plan all along. That's why his whole family kept harassing me, trying to drive me out. I knew it, but hearing it said outright was still a shock. It was someone I once loved and even married. But thanks to this, I made up my mind. "Fine," I said, deciding to divorce James. "But this condo is mine, and I'm not at fault either." "What did you say?" "The reason for the divorce is you allowing your family to live with us without asking me and your family ignoring me," I said firmly to James. He seemed shocked that I outright rejected his proposal, not expecting such a response. It made sense, as I had always complied with his demands since our marriage. Thinking back on it made me angry. "I don't want to spend another second with you all, so I'll leave now. But you should also prepare to leave. It's a joke, right? This is our home. We won't leave. Ever heard of residential rights? You can't just force people out who live here," James shouted. Ignoring his ranting, I left the house and went to my grandparents' place. I explained everything and asked if I could stay until things were settled. My grandparents were shocked to learn what I had gone through and scolded me for not consulting them earlier. With tears in their eyes, I apologized. "Grandma, Grandpa, I'm sorry for worrying you, but I'll be okay now. I look fragile, but I'm not really," I said, forcing a laugh with tears in my eyes. The day after I left the apartment, James contacted me right away. "Hey, what's this all about?" "What are you referring to?" I asked. "The certified mail," he said. I was impressed by how quickly things were moving. I had handed the divorce proceedings over to a lawyer, and when I told them yesterday that I was leaving the house, they arranged for everything to be sorted out today. "I'm not paying any alimony, and I'm not leaving the condo," James declared. But legally, he had an obligation to pay, and he didn't have the right to continue living in that apartment. "What are you talking about? That apartment is mine too, since we're married. If you insist, then pay me half its value to buy me out," he said. Such an absurd claim. "Talking like this is getting us nowhere. Please communicate through my lawyer from now on," I said, ending the call. I knew he would probably call again tomorrow, but I had no desire to talk anymore. As expected, he called the next morning. "Hey, what's this all about?" he repeated, showing no creativity. "What are you referring to? The card's not working. What did you do?" "What I did was cancel it. That card was mine, and you were just using the family card, remember?" Indeed, before leaving the house, I had switched all the contracts from that card to another and canceled it. Of course, the family cards would stop working when I canceled mine. I was the one paying for it. "Yes, you paid the apartment's management fee and property taxes just for the first 4 months. It's not much, but I can deduct that from the alimony if you like," I mocked him. I heard some indistinct shouting from the other end of the phone. That's right. James only paid the agreed amount for just 4 months. He made various excuses about the store and whatnot, always finding a reason to ask me to wait, but then he stopped paying altogether. If he forgot and thought he was still paying, that's some poor memory. But I didn't care anymore. He's someone I'm cutting ties with. His memory doesn't matter to me. That's the situation, so please pay your half of the living expenses I've been covering. I've kept a detailed record of our household expenses, which I'll use as evidence to fairly divide our savings. It's marital property, I demanded. Yes, I understand. Let's split it accordingly, he agreed. He ended the call with a reminder not to forget. A few days later, I got another call from him using the same line. I realized they lacked not only memory but also vocabulary. What do you mean by the split of shared property? Why is it 0? You must be rolling in cash from your parents' insurance and alimony, he said. Ah, so that's what they were thinking. I patiently explained that my savings before marriage weren't part of the shared property, and since we had no savings after marriage, it naturally amounted to 0. Don't lie to me. If you think I'm lying, why don't you consult with someone? From now on, please communicate through my attorney. I won't be speaking to you directly anymore. Goodbye, I said, then hung up the phone and blocked James's number. 1 month after I left the house, James and his family finally moved out of the apartment, not because they had a change of heart, but because they couldn't sustain their lifestyle. Naturally, James's income alone wasn't enough for a family of 5. They were used to shopping extravagantly with my card. Telling them to cut back now was impossible. I had let them use the card intentionally for this, knowing it would come to this. His family started pestering James for shopping money, and when he refused, they began stealing from his wallet. Even when James got angry, they blamed him for kicking me out. To top it off, the electricity, gas, and water were all shut off. Of course, I had arranged for that since I didn't plan to live there for a while. James tried to get the utilities restored immediately by phone, but the house was in my name, so no one else could reconnect them if the owner had them stopped. During the hot summer and early fall, his family couldn't handle the extreme heat and eventually left the condo. Where they went, I neither know nor care. James tried to stay until the end, but he eventually gave up because there was no electricity and he couldn't bathe. The divorce proceedings went faster than expected, not because James had a change of heart, but because he made mistakes. He cheated on me while we were still married, or rather, he started making moves on someone, thinking he could kick me out soon. He boasted about owning a luxury apartment in a prime location downtown, using it to attract young girls. It's surprising he did this while his family was around, but he had a history of such behavior, so they didn't mind. Before leaving, I had installed cameras in several places in the house, which captured all the evidence. Maybe he underestimated me, but he really did disrespect me. He brought his family into my home without my permission, made a family card, and left me the bill. He kicked me out and he cheated on me. For all of these, I sought alimony and a sizable payment. James paled at the sight of the sum and frantically begged for reconciliation, but I had no such plans. I took whatever I could obtain and forced him to borrow as much as I could from his business because I knew he couldn't pay. He grudgingly accepted my demands after I threatened to sue him for fraud with the family card. I hope he makes every effort to settle his loan. The divorce is finalized, and I'm still staying at my grandparents' place. I haven't decided what to do with the apartment yet. I may sell it. Since my parents died when I was very young and I don't remember them, along with everything that has transpired, I thought they would understand if I let it go, even though I valued it because they left it to me. I'm getting more work as an illustrator. It's a nice time for me to live alone again, though. While I'm staying at my grandparents', I can work perfectly well. I'll rely on them for a little while longer before moving on with courage. I won't be duped by a man who is just attractive the next time. I'm looking for someone with whom I can share my life. Almost as long as I've been Richard's wife, I've been a doctor. My name is Eleanor. Despite our ups and downs, those 30 years passed by as if they were insignificant. Particularly while the boys were small, the sounds of life permeated our large, comfortable home. Even though our kids, James and Oliver, were completely different from one another, they each made us happy in their own unique ways. As doctors, Richard and I put a lot of effort into creating a comfortable existence. Over the years, we were able to purchase a few flats and rent them out to supplement our income. Up until the day Richard returned home looking paler and more solemn than I had seen him in years, everything seemed to be going well in my life. "Eleanor, we need to talk," he remarked solemnly as he left his medical bag by the door. "Last week, I underwent various testing. The findings, they returned. Eleanor, it's cancer." The months that followed were a haze of unending waiting rooms, treatments, and hospital visits. Despite Richard's valiant efforts, the cancer proved unforgiving. It was agony to watch the strongest man I knew deteriorate. Medical school doesn't prepare you for that. One evening, as we sat quietly in the living room, Richard took my hand. "Eleanor, if things don't go our way, you need to make sure everything's sorted with the boys. The will's all done. You'll be fine financially." Not long after he was gone. The funeral was a somber affair. Family, friends, and colleagues, people came from all over to pay their respects. But it was the quiet at home, after everyone left, that hit me the hardest. Empty spaces. Richard used to fill them. His things just where he left them. It hurt to see, to remember. A few days post-funeral, I was in the kitchen, trying to make sense of leftover food, when James stormed in, his face all twisted up in worry and anger. Oliver trailed behind him, looking like he wanted to be anywhere but here. "Mom, we need to talk about Dad's will," James said, cutting straight to the chase as he always did. I sighed, setting down the cling film. "Yes, I know. Your father left everything to me. He wanted to make sure I was taken care of." James slammed his hand on the counter. "But what about me and Oliver? We're his sons. It's not right that we get nothing." Now Oliver piped up, trying to smooth things over. "James, let's not jump into this so hot-headed. Mom's still grieving. We can sort this out without arguing." James shot him a glare. "Easy for you to say. You're not thinking about the future. I am." I leaned against the counter, feeling the weight of their stares. "Your father and I built this together. He trusted me to handle things, but I hear you, James. It's not my plan to cut you out." "So what then?" James said, crossing his arms, his voice rising a notch. "We just wait until you think it's a good time to give us our share." "James, watch your tone," I snapped, my patience fraying. "I am still your mother." Oliver stepped between us, his hands up like a referee. "Both of you, please. This isn't helping." "Mom, maybe there's a middle ground here." I nodded, rubbing my temples. "Okay, here's what we can do. The apartments your father and I invested in, the ones downtown." James interrupted. "Yes, those." I continued, shooting him a look that told him to zip it for a minute. "I was thinking you each take one. They're yours to live in or rent out. And from the savings, let's say $225,000 each, to help you get started on whatever you need." James chewed on his lip, clearly doing the math in his head. "And the rest of the stuff, the house, the money, that stays with me for now. When I'm gone, it'll come to you." "As for your father's wishes," I said firmly. James looked like he wanted to argue more, but Oliver nudged him. Let's think about this, man. It's a fair start. Mom's not leaving us in the cold." James finally nodded, tight-lipped. "Fine, but I want this in writing, Mom. No more surprises." "Of course," I agreed. "We'll get everything documented properly." As they left the kitchen, I could hear Oliver hissing at James. "Give her a break, will you? She's doing her best." James muttered something under his breath I couldn't catch, and I didn't really want to. As I washed up the dishes, I wondered if Richard could see us and what he'd think. I hoped I was doing the right thing, but only time would tell. And time, that tricky thing, wasn't always a friend. It was a sunny afternoon, a rare kind that makes everything seem all right, when James brought Isabella over to meet me for the first time. They hadn't been dating long, but James was already head over heels. You could tell by the way he was fussing over her, which wasn't like him at all. They walked in, and right off the bat, Isabella had this air about her, like she owned the place. Dressed to the nines, she breezed into my living room with barely a hello, her eyes scanning everything. "Nice place you've got here," she said, flipping her hair back as she sat down without waiting for an invitation. James was grinning like a fool beside her. I forced a smile, trying to be the good host. "Thank you, Isabella. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Tea?" "Coffee sounds lovely," she replied, then turned to James. "Babe, make sure it's black. No sugar." James nodded and headed to the kitchen. That left me alone with her, sitting in my own living room, feeling like the guest. The silence was awkward until she broke it. "So James tells me you're pretty well off," she started, eyeing the decor. "I'm used to a certain standard, you know. My parents made sure of that." "That's good to hear," I said, not sure what else to add. James came back with the coffee and handed Isabella her cup. She took a sip and made a face. It's all right. Anyway, we've been discussing our future together, planning ahead, you know." "That's wise," I said, glancing at James, hoping he'd give me some clue about where this conversation was heading. Isabella set her cup down. "Yeah, and speaking of planning, we were thinking about the wedding. You know I want something special. James has probably told you. I saw this place, perfect for a rehearsal dinner, but it's a bit pricey. It's about $30,000. I choked on my coffee. $30,000 just for the rehearsal dinner. James jumped in. "Mom, it's important to Bella. We want to start things off right." I put my cup down, feeling a storm brewing inside. "Look, that's a lot of money for a dinner, Isabella. We need to be reasonable." Isabella's face hardened. "Reasonable? James says you have the means. I don't see why we should compromise on something that important." James was nodding along with her, but I could see the unease in his eyes. He knew he was asking too much. "I'm all for celebrating," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "But $30,000 is beyond excessive. I can't justify that." Isabella stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I'm not used to compromising on my standards, Eleanor. I was clear with James that I expect a certain lifestyle." James tried to smooth things over. "Mom, maybe we can find a middle ground." "There's no middle ground on $30,000 for a dinner, James." "That's final," I snapped, losing my patience. Isabella picked up her purse, glaring at me. "Fine. If that's how it's going to be, then maybe we need to reconsider some things." They left soon after. I sat there, reeling from the encounter. The nerve of that girl coming into my home, drinking my coffee, and telling me how to spend my money. It felt like a slap in the face, a wake-up call I wasn't ready for. I was out at the grocery store when James and Isabella decided to drop by again. By the time I got home, Oliver was awkwardly entertaining them in the living room. The atmosphere was tense, the kind that makes you want to turn around and leave. But it was my house, so I braced myself and walked in. Isabella, all dolled up as usual, handed me a list as soon as I set down my grocery bags. Eleanor, we thought a lot about the wedding gifts, and here's what we've settled on. I hope this will be easier for you to handle. I skimmed the list she handed me. It was surprisingly sensible. Kitchen appliances, some nice china, even a couple of pieces of furniture. This seems quite reasonable, I said, feeling a momentary relief. I think these are wonderful choices, really. James looked at Isabella, a hopeful expression crossing his face. But just as I was about to discuss where we could buy these items, Isabella's expression changed abruptly. She gasped, "Oh no, this isn't right. Give that back." She snatched the list from my hands and rummaged through her purse, pulling out another sheet of paper. Here's the actual list. This new list was nothing like the first. It included an apartment, a luxury car, an exclusive vacation, and even diamond jewelry. My jaw dropped. Is this some kind of joke? Isabella didn't flinch. No joke, Eleanor. These are the gifts we expect. Only the best for our wedding. I stared at her, then at James, waiting for him to say something, anything, to suggest he didn't agree with this madness. But he just stood there, looking between us, clearly conflicted but silent. I couldn't hold back. James, why are you letting her do this? You know this is unreasonable. Isabella cut in, her voice rising. This doesn't concern you, Eleanor. You just need to pay up and keep quiet. That's when Oliver stood up, his face set hard. That's enough, Isabella. You're not going to talk to our mom like that. This is her house, and you're way out of line. You need to leave now. The room was thick with tension as James and Isabella gathered their things. Isabella was muttering under her breath, clearly angry. This is ridiculous. We'll remember this. They left, and the door slammed shut behind them. Sitting down, I felt the weight of the whole situation pressing down on me. Oliver sat beside me, putting an arm around my shoulders. We'll figure this out, Mom, but you can't let them bully you into giving more than you can or should. It's not right. He was right, of course, but as I sat there with my son, I couldn't help but worry about James. How had things gotten so out of hand? How could he not see what this was doing to our family? The silence that followed was filled with unsaid worries and fears for the future. I knew then that this was far from over. It was only going to get tougher from here. The weeks that followed were a constant barrage of phone calls from James. Each one was more demanding than the last. His tone desperate, almost frantic at times. "Mom, you don't understand. I can't look poor next to Bella's family," he'd argue, his voice cracking with stress. "You have the money. Why can't you just help me out here?" I sat at the kitchen table, the phone pressed against my ear, feeling a knot in my stomach. "James, it's not about the money. It's about living within your means. Bella's expectations. You can't sustain that. Not without going into serious debt." He'd scoff, his frustration boiling over. "What do you know about it? I'm not going to live like I need more from the inheritance now." "The demand's done, James. I've offered to cover half the wedding costs, up to $115,000, and give a $5,000 gift. That's more than generous. Everything has to be agreed upon with me, though. No surprises." There was a pause, then a sharp laugh from him. "That's nothing. You're just being stingy. You have $1 million sitting there. Why are you holding out on me?" "Because it's not just about the money," I replied, my patience wearing thin. "It's about not feeding into this fantasy that's going to ruin you." He yelled, now loud enough that I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "I don't need this. I'll handle it my way. Forget you." And then, just like that, the call stopped. Months passed in silence. I tried to busy myself with daily routines, trying not to worry about James. But the peace was short-lived. The phone rang one afternoon. It was my sister-in-law, Anita. "Eleanor, I thought you should know." Anita's voice was hesitant, careful. "James is flying all the wedding guests to Hawaii. He sold his apartment to fund it, and he expects you to get there on your own. He mentioned you weren't interested in helping." I hung up, a mix of anger and sorrow turning inside me. How could he be so reckless? Before I could process it all, Oliver came into the room, his expression grim. "Mom, there's something you need to hear." He handed me an audio recorder. I recorded their conversation when they were sitting here in the living room. I pressed play, and the voices of James and Isabella filled the kitchen. "James, your mom is just a nasty old woman with a fat wallet. We need to squeeze as much as we can out of her, and then cut her off." James's voice responded, chillingly agreeable. "Whatever it takes, Bella. I'm not going to let her control us. If it comes down to it, I'll kick her out in her underwear." I turned off the recorder, my hands trembling. To hear my own son speak like that about me, his mother, was too much. The room spun as I tried to comprehend the depth of his betrayal. Flying to Hawaii was a decision I didn't make lightly. Oliver was by my side, both of us tense, but determined to face whatever awaited us. When we landed and approached the venue, I was taken aback by the sheer opulence of it all. Flowers everywhere, lights strung like stars across the evening sky, and music floating in the air. I saw James and Isabella interacting with guests as we entered the event. With their constant laughter and grins, they appeared to be the ideal couple. Seeing my youngster so engrossed in this made-up paradise broke my heart. Isabella noticed us before I could move closer to them. As she strode closer, her high heels tapping violently against the stone walkway, her smile turned into a frown. She stopped inches from me and snarled, "You shouldn't be here," loud enough to attract attention. "This is my day and you're not welcome." Her parents overheard and approached before I could react, leaving me speechless. The tall, stern-looking man who spoke first was her father. "Isabella, that is no way to speak to your guest, much less to James's mother." His tone was harsh, a reprimand that made her cheeks flush with embarrassment. Her mother, looking equally appalled, turned to me with an apologetic smile. "Eleanor, please come with us. Let's find you a place to sit." They led us to a table at the edge of the arrangement, which was obviously an afterthought without the appropriate setting. Shortly later, the ceremony began with speeches that, considering the stress, sounded hollow. The microphone was then handed to me without warning. I stood, my resolve unwavering despite my unsteady legs. I started out by saying, "I came here today to wish my son and his new wife a happy future, maintaining my composure despite my internal shaking. But I also believe in honesty and integrity, something that's been sorely missing from the events leading up to this day." Isabella's face went from pink to red, her eyes glaring daggers at me. I was asked for money time and again in amounts that no reasonable person would find justifiable. When I couldn't meet these demands, I was threatened with separation from my family and future grandchildren. I continued even if my voice cracked a little. Oliver moved closer after noticing my anguish and put a comforting hand on my shoulder. After giving him a nod, I switched on the audio recording he had created. Isabella's icy, cunning voice filled the room as she talked about how they would take advantage of me for more money. James's voice concurred, stating that he was willing to give up everything for his bride. The air was heavy with astonishment and disdain as the crowd whispered. The silence was profound as I switched off the recorder. "I gave my son an apartment and $25,000, and yet it was never enough. Today I'm making it clear. I will not be treated as an ATM or threatened. I am done with James and Isabella. I wish them well, but from this day forward, I am choosing to remove myself from their lives. The reaction was immediate. Isabella screamed, her voice shrill and wild. You've ruined my wedding. I curse you. Returning home was bittersweet after everything that had transpired. Even I was surprised by the decision I made in the silence. I resigned from my position. As a doctor, I had spent years mending people, but now it was time to heal myself and put my life back together after the recent storms had destroyed it. Bless his heart, Oliver was full of ideas and aspirations after graduating from art college. I gave him $25,000. He used that money to start his own tattoo studio. It was no ordinary store. It soon developed into a location where skin and art came together in breathtaking presentations. Oliver gave his everything to his effort, and it was fruitful. He started entering tattoo contests, and soon enough his name was on every local's lips. Before we knew it, he was opening more locations, creating a network of salons that became a hot spot for tattoo enthusiasts. I'd watch him sketch late into the night, his dedication a stark contrast to the chaos his brother had chosen. You're doing amazing, Ollie, I'd say, pride swelling in my chest. It was during these calm months that James reappeared. One afternoon, he showed up at the door, his eyes tired, his shoulders slumped, so different from the ambitious, sharp man he once was. He stated, "Mom, I need to talk," without waiting for a meeting invitation. In contrast to the authoritative tone I had become used to, his voice seemed tired. I let out a sigh and gestured for him to go on. "What is it, James?" "Saying it's Bella. She's making me crazy. It seems like nothing is ever enough. Even with my second job, she still doesn't think it's enough." Despite his desperation, his words were unable to completely change the past. "I warned you, James. I told you that it's not sustainable to live that way with someone like her." With obvious annoyance, he rubbed his face. I know you did, but I thought," he said, his voice trailing off, explanation replaced by despair. "What did you think? Wouldn't you want the money to just show up?" Years of repressed annoyance made it difficult to soften my harsh tone. "Take a look at your brother. He began with the same determination and succeeded without infringing on the rights of others." James became agitated. "Indeed, it's true that not everyone is like Oliver. Remember that I also have rights to the inheritance, and I'll get it when you're gone." The final straw was that. I said, "Get out, James," in a firm, icy tone. "And don't return. Not now. You made your own decisions." His jaw tensed, and I briefly believed he might continue to dispute. However, the door slammed behind him as he turned and left. After hearing the final portion of our conversation, Oliver came downstairs while I was standing in the ensuing silence. He said, "Are you okay, Mom?" I nodded and wrapped my arms around him. "Thank you, I am now. Let's just concentrate on the good we can accomplish and the life we can create." He gave me a hug in return, reassuring me that not all had been lost. I realized then that the path was still worthwhile in spite of the harditas. The fact that we had each other was sufficient to keep going. Our house calmed down after James and I weathered the storm, which I hadn't experienced in a long time. Oliver welcomed a special someone home during this calm time. Her name was Sarah, and she was lovely, modest, and truly caring, everything Isabella wasn't. Their bond deepened as the weeks stretched into months, and they soon declared their engagement. In contrast to James's lavish celebration, the wedding was a small, intimate ceremony held in our backyard. The day was made ideal by a small gathering of close friends and family, handcrafted decorations, and flowers from the garden. During the reception, I pulled Oliver aside. "You've chosen a wonderful woman," I said, my voice thick with emotion. He squeezed my hand. "I learned from the best," he said, glaring at me sardonically. After then, life happened fast. They used some of their funds to purchase a modest but comfortable home a few miles away after selling the flat I had given Oliver. Sarah gave us some news one bright afternoon while we were enjoying tea in their beautiful living room. She declared, "Eleanor, we're expecting twins," with delight in her eyes. I nearly dropped my cup, overwhelmed with joy. Twins? Oh my goodness, that's wonderful. Oliver smiled, clearly proud. "We wanted to let you know first. Mom, we're very happy." Twins. I said it again, giving the words time to register. Grandchildren. I was excited to begin this new chapter. There wasn't much news from James. He had divorced Isabella as of the last time I heard. He had to start again in another city because she had taken almost everything after the separation. It was painful to know that he was struggling someplace as a result of his decisions, even in spite of the suffering he had inflicted. Oliver sat next to me one evening as I was browsing through old photo albums. He came across an old photo of James and me. He said, "Do you ever hear from him?" I gave a headshake. No. After all, I have to respect his decision to follow his own path, even though it hurts my feelings. Oliver wrapped me in his arm. "Mom, he remains my brother. Perhaps he will eventually change his mind." I said, "Maybe," though I wasn't entirely sure if I believed it. "We have plenty to occupy us for the time being, though, particularly with those twins on the way." Oliver laughed. "Yeah, you're about to be the busiest grandma in town." The sound of our laughter filled the room with warmth. This moment with Oliver felt like everything was just right, despite the history, the mistakes, and the heartaches. We were both going on with life, with new aspirations and expectations on the horizon.